Hello, my name is Chantal Bilodeau, and I am the artistic director of the Arctic Cycle. And I'm very happy to be part of this Science Meets Art event. I'm going to be talking about engaging communities in climate storytelling. But first of all, let me share my screen so I can show you some images. Here we go. So the Arctic Cycle, the mission of the Arctic Cycle is to use theater to foster dialogue about our global climate crisis, create an empowering vision of the future, and encourage people or inspire people to take action. So stories, so essentially our mission is to tell stories and empower others to tell stories. So why stories? Stories are how we create meaning. If you look at the world and just consider the facts, they really don't add up to anything. Facts are just what happens. They're random events. And in and of themselves, they don't have any meaning. But if you, as an example of that, if you think of everything that happens in a person's day, probably the only sense you can make of it is a chronological one. You have all these events that are somewhat unrelated, and you can look at how they happen from the beginning of the day to the end. But in and of themselves, they don't have any meaning. In order to create meaning, you have to decide which facts are important, related to a certain topic or a certain thing you want to understand, and how they relate to each other. And the process of building the connective tissues that weaves these facts together for us to understand them as a cohesive narrative, that connective tissue, that's what we call a story. And it's something we do naturally. We build stories around, we decide, we look at the world, we decided what facts are meaningful for a certain, something we're trying to figure out. And then we create this connected tissue naturally, and that becomes a story. Stories are also how we learn and how we remember things. So if you're thinking about being engrossed in reading a story and watching a film, our brains react as if we were experiencing these events ourselves. So we relate, or we put ourselves in the feet, or in the skin of the characters we're watching or the characters we're reading, and that puts an imprint on our brain that makes it easier for us to remember. And why is this important in relationship to the climate crisis? I'm going to show you a graph to help understand. So I'm talking very much from an American perspective because I'm based in the United States. And this is a study that was done by two organizations, one called the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, and the other one is the Center for Climate Change Communication out of George Mason University. And you can see these two lines. The top one in black is, this is a study, I'm sorry, this is a study that was done over 10 years from 2009 to 2019. And the line at the top in black is people who reported that they rarely or never discuss climate change with their family and friends. And that's way more than half of the population. That's 63% of people as an average. The people who do often or occasionally talk about climate change with friends and family represents only 37%. So when we talk about climate change, the stories or the information doesn't seem to come into our private lives. It's something that exists out there. We hear it from media, mainstream media, but it doesn't permeate our individual lives. And yet, these stories that we hear from the media are a big part of how we understand climate and how we learn about climate. But if these stories don't trickle down to our individual lives, it means it's going to be very difficult to make significant progress towards reducing our carbon emissions. I'm going to show you another image to illustrate a little bit what I'm saying. These are magazine covers that were put out for Earth Day last year in 2019 by the Washington Post magazine. And it was called 20 magazine covers about climate change. And they each illustrated an aspect of climate change that the Post wrote about the year prior. So here you have a sample of them, 6 of the 24. And as you can see, these magazines represent, or they put forward a very specific narrative of disaster. So the stories we're hearing are stories of failure, essentially. So they're natural disasters, they're policy failure, they're all the things that are going wrong, and there are plenty that is going wrong with the climate. Not to say that we shouldn't hear these. These are very important. It's important to understand the urgency. It's important to understand the scope. But at the same time, stories exist on the spectrum, and we're only getting a small portion of the spectrum. We're only getting, as you can see, droughts, polar ice sheet melting, bees dying, wildfires. This is one part of what's happening. What we're not hearing is the flip side, which is all the people who are actually working hard to make a difference, some of which are succeeding. Now, we haven't succeeded on a grand scale yet, but there is progress. There is a lot of innovation. There is a lot of efforts. And if we don't hear about those efforts, then we stay with we can have the assumption that nothing is happening and nothing is working. And this is disempowering. So, next, experiencing all of this, of course, none of this information was available as is when I first started thinking about climate change in my own work, but some of it was there. I'm trained as a playwright. That's why I'm so interested in stories. This is a photo of a trip I took in Alaska in 2007. And at that time, 2007 was 1 year after Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth documentary came out. So climate change was more in mainstream conversation. And it was also at a time where the Arctic was not, at least in people's imagination, it was not obvious or clear why we needed to be concerned about what was happening in the Arctic. The US has a small Arctic territory. It's only Alaska. I'm originally from Canada. I was born there, grew up there. Canada has a huge Arctic territory. And, you know, it's been shown that the rate of change or the rate of warming is twice as much as in most of the rest of the world. So the Arctic territory started experiencing changes in climate and all kinds of other changes related to climate much earlier than we did. So back to 2007, on that trip in Alaska, you can see the red arrow shows you where the line where the glacier used to be, and you can see in white where it is now. So at that time, I knew it was pretty clear to me that glaciers were retreating. But what I hadn't learned yet is that glaciers also deflate. And here you have a good visual example of a glacier that had deflated. And for a sense of scale, I have circled a building on the slope, which is an old building that was related to a mine that used to be there. So what that did is that I had a very visceral experience of the changing climate and how it was reflected in the landscape. And I started thinking as a playwright, is there any way I can bring that visceral experience to people who may not travel to the north, to help them understand what's going on, how what we're doing is affecting those places, and especially how it's affecting the people who live there, who actually contributed very little to the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Coming back from that trip, I did a bunch of research. I got interested in the Canadian Arctic because, like I said, I'm from there, and in Canada, we have a huge Arctic territory. And I took a trip. I went on a research trip to Baffin Island in the territory of Nunavut to see how climate change was impacting the Inuit population, which is in the indigenous group who lives there, and the territory up there. In coming back from that trip, I wrote a play called Sila, which is looks at the impact of climate change on that territory and the people who live there, but also the different interests that are bearing down on that region. So you have scientific interests, cultural interests, economic interests. And I was really interested in the complexity of all of these things, trying to get a piece of something that is changing very fast and how we can understand how these complexities play out and maybe figure out a way to address them. So not address one thing in particular, but really look at the whole and see how we can protect that environment, make sure the people who are there can preserve their culture and their living and all of that. And I'll show you some images. These are images of the production. There were polar bears in the play. You can see polar bear puppets. They were almost life-size. And then you can also see there was a goddess of the ocean and the underworld. You can see a representation of her in one of the photos. And in the middle is the publication of that play. It was so fascinating when I was working on this project that I felt that one play wasn't enough. There was more I wanted to explore, more I wanted to say. It was a huge topic. You know, one play was great, but it didn't capture it all. So I decided to write another play. And that time I went to Norway. So I was invited for an artist residency on a boat in Norway, where we sailed around the Svalbard archipelago, which is a group of islands between mainland Norway and the North Pole, sort of in the middle of the two. And returning from that trip, I learned a whole bunch of stuff. I was also still interested in the complexity of it all, how the two countries were similar and different. And I wrote another play, which is called Forward. Again, you have some images from the production, the publication, and Forward took a slightly different approach. Instead of looking at complexity and interconnectedness on the land, since I was on a boat, I decided to look at the maritime aspect of the Arctic. And I wrote a storyline that takes place over 120 years. So from the time Nansen, the Norwegian explorer, tried to make it to the North Pole, being one of the first explorers to make it to the North Pole, to present day and are dealing with climate change. After the second play, still wasn't enough. So I decided, okay, I need a little bit of a container to continue. How am I gonna keep broaching the subject, dealing with the subject in something that is somewhat cohesive? And because I was so interested in the Arctic, I learned that there are 8 Arctic countries. And so I decided I'm going to write one play for each of the country that has territory in the Arctic. And you can see where they are here. I have written the play about Canada, one about Norway. I'm currently working on a play about the US. And there will still be Greenland, Iceland, Sweden, Finland, and Russia to do. Now, this said, it's a very ambitious project. Writing a play takes a long time. Producing a play takes a long time, takes a lot of resources. So it's not a fast process. And of course, things are changing very fast. And I feel like I felt and still feel like we have to help change happen fast. We don't have a lot of time to have this happen over a long, long time. And the other thing that I was thinking about is, it's great I'm doing all of these things, but this is one voice. This is one voice, one perspective. It's not enough. You know, this is a problem that is happening globally. It's impacting people very differently in different countries or even within the same country. And so I wanted to have more voices represented, more stories out into the world. essentially ramp up the efforts. And I got together with some colleagues in 2015, and we dreamed up this project that is called Climate Change Theater Action. And what it is a worldwide series of readings and performances of short climate change plays that are presented to coincide with the United Nations COP meetings, which are always in the fall every year. And these meetings are where the world leaders gather to discuss ways to reduce global greenhouse gas emission. What we do, so we present this project happens every other year. First time was in 2015. We did it again in 2017, 2019, and the next one is coming up in 2021. What we do is we commission 50 playwrights from around the world, making sure that every inhabited continent is represented. And we ask them to write a 5-minute play dealing with an aspect of climate change based on a prompt. Then this collection of 50 plays is made available to organizers anywhere in the world, again, who are interested in organizing an event within a certain time window in the fall. So all of the events take place over 3 months in the fall, usually from September to December. We also asked the organizers, because this is called Climate Change Theater Action, that in addition to the theatrical presentation, they think of an action that they can do that either brings people together who would normally not encounter each other, or something that encourages greater engagement with the issue. So it's a way to engage communities. Another thing I should say is we ask people who participate in a project to use at least one play from our collection of plays. They can use several if they want to, but at least one. And then they can add any material of their own. So if they want to add other plays by local playwrights, if they want to add music, singer-songwriters, do a visual exhibition, anything is possible. So we give as much agency as possible to people so they can create an event that really reflects their aesthetic, their community, and the local issues. I mentioned that we give a prompt to playwrights. So in 2019, again, the last time we did the project, our prompt was Lighting the Way. And I'm going to read you exactly what it said. What we told the playwright was, this year we want to give center stage to the unsung climate warriors and climate heroes who are lighting the way towards a just and sustainable future. These might be individuals or communities fighting for justice or inventing new technologies. They may be animal, plants, or spirits imparting wisdom, or they may be a part of yourself you didn't know was there. Feel free to be literal or not, and to travel forward or backward in time. So the prompt is intended as a starting point to give inspiration to the playwrights. And it's also a way to encourage playwrights to look beyond the headlines. So what are the stories that are not covered by the headlines? What are the stories that we're not hearing? What are the things that are not being told that we should really know about and learn about? And as a result of this prompt, I'm going to give you an example of some of the stories we received. Someone wrote about new technologies, in particular shoes made of mango leather. There were retelling of old myths and stories that incorporated climate change. Another person wrote about what it means to be a hero. There were plays that tackled coming together as a community, giving legal rights to nature, and standing up to big corporations. These plays happen all over, which is kind of exciting. There's not one set. It doesn't have to be in a theater. It doesn't have to be, very formally presentational. It can be, the events range from reading plays in a classroom with students and discussing them to fully mounted productions on a stage. So it can be anywhere. Oh, and also people will do podcasts, they'll do radio shows. Some plays have been adapted into short films. The possibilities are really vast. And some of the places where the plays have been presented include theaters, of course, universities and schools, but also outside in parks, in national parks, on street corners, in people's backyards, in cafes and bars. Other non-traditional venues include libraries, churches, community centers, yoga studios, and museums. Some of my favorite ones happen at the foot of glaciers or in kayaks. And I've mentioned there's been radio programs and podcasts. I mentioned about asking people to take an action. Again, those are not prescriptive. People are welcome to do whatever makes sense for them, whatever they can imagine. But just an example of some of the actions that have been taken. There were some years where there were donations made to hurricane relief efforts. More recently, there's been donations made to environmental organizations, tree planting initiatives, and food banks. A lot of times people will organize their audience to write letters that they send to government representatives asking for strict policies on greenhouse gas emissions. There have been marches and pledges. I know of groups who have decided to change their eating habit and went from eating meat to becoming vegan. In universities in particular, or in school, there's often presentations by scientists and local environmental organizations. So the academic community will reach out to people in their local community and try to bring the two together. And there's also local resources that have been compiled and shared with audiences. I want to show you some photos to give you a little bit of a sense of what the events look like. So when the events happen in the fall, we keep in touch with all of the organizers and we help with the marketing. Everything is posted on our website. We also share events on social media, and then we stay in touch and ask for feedback afterwards and for photo and video footage. So here are some of the photos from 2019. This first one is from our kickoff event, which is always the first event that launches the whole season. It happens in New York City since it's where we were based. We picked 4 plays out of our collection, presented those 4 plays, and also included some poems that were written specifically for the event. And we had a panel, an all-women panel, to discuss the science, policy, and art of climate change. This is another photo from an event that took place in South Korea. A group called Blooming Ludus worked with school children and read some of the plays. A theater company in Colorado called Be Wilderness Theater Company presented an event outside in a national park. Native Earth, which is an Indigenous theater company in Toronto, also presented an event. This is from Minnesota. An event that was part of a cabaret presentation at Yale University. Another university, Iowa State University, which I think has participating every time we have done the project. And this photo is from Massey University in New Zealand. To give you a sense of the scope, in 2019, we presented over 200 events in 28 countries. 78 universities participated worldwide. All 50 US states were represented, and this is something we've been trying to achieve since the very beginning. And every year, there's always a couple of states missing, but this time in 2019, we managed to get all 50 states to participate. 3,000 participants were directly involved. These are people who organized the events, the actors, the producers, the directors, so anybody who's part of putting the event together. And we had 26,000 audience members. Here are some of the quotes. So as I said, we keep in touch with participants, and here are some of the things that our participants had to say. We asked for feedback afterwards, and there are some of the things they wrote to us. Students in Germany said it was a perfect opportunity for us to become active on this issue. Someone who organized an event in the state of Oregon wrote, "It was exciting to bring together scientists and artists working to achieve a common goal." In Ontario, in Canada, the province of Ontario, someone wrote, "Audiences were riled up and inspired by the art, and then given the opportunity to connect with local environmental groups in search of volunteers for their projects." Once the season is over, we put all of the plays together. We published them together in an anthology. So the one you see, Where's the Hope, was the 2017 plays, and Lighting the Way is the most recent one, the 2019 plays. The reason for that is that we don't want, this is great, these are great tools, they're great stories, and we want them to continue to circulate. So even if people don't organize events, they can read them, they can share them with students, study them in class. It's also a way to learn about how to connect local issues and global issues. You know, among the 50 plays, you have themes that come back, even though the playwrights may be from completely different regions. So it's another way to make sure that there is a way, there's something to gather around, there's a starting point for conversation that is not necessarily a scientific lecture, or is not rooted in, it's not a political rally, so it's not rooted in ideology. It's a very, something where you can connect very personally, and that can open up a space to then have conversation with people around you. And finally, I want to just give you the two websites if you want to find out more. Our organization, the Arctic Cycle, you can find thearcticcycle.org. And if you want to learn about the project in particular, you can go to climatechangetheatereaction.com. Our next Climate Change Theater Action will happen in the fall of 2021. We'll be giving out more details in early 2021. So if you want to find out more, there's a way, you go to our websites, there's a way to find out, to sign up for, to receive our newsletter. That's how you'll find out. And I want to thank you again for inviting me to be part of this event. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And here I want to say, enjoy the conference, and thank you.